This is the Little Moments Count radio podcast, created in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. Each episode, you'll hear interviews with early childhood experts on how to support the important brain development that takes place in the first 1,000 days of life, just through little moments every day. Learn more at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.
Good morning, Twin Cities. Welcome to the narrative here on KSM, where we amplify the voices, stories, cultures, and conversations that are happening in our neighborhoods. We like to focus on community that has been historically ignored, misrepresented, and erased by traditional media. I'm your host, Andrea Pierre, and today is our Little Moments Count segment. This episode of The Narrative is presented in partnership with Little Moments Count, and Little Moments Count is a statewide collaborative focused on helping parents and caregivers learn about the importance of brain development in the first 3 years of life. Did you know that nearly 80% of brain growth happens in the first 1,000 days, and small moments of interaction like talking, playing, reading, and singing even can help create pathways that build a child's brain development in the early stage of life. For more information, you can visit the littlemomentscount.org website. And, I'm just really excited to welcome you, Dr. Artika Tyner, to our show. How are you feeling this morning?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Honored to be here with you.
And you look just fantastic. Like you just got my kind of style, lots of color and little accents.
Thank you.
And it's a beautiful summer morning here in the Twin Cities. Just really glad to be in the space with you. So you have a really great bio. So if you don't know Dr. Artika Tyner, they are a passionate educator, author, sought after speaker, and advocate for justice. Dr. Tyner is the CEO of Planting People, Growing Justice Press and Bookstore. And it goes by PPGJ, the little shorter acronym. They publish and promote books that encourage and empower children to find joy in reading. In recognition of her leadership and service, she was a recipient of more than 24 awards that include Women in Business, American Small Business Champion, International Educator, Citizen Attorney of the Year, American Bar Association, different makers, and she has been in a variety of media outlets, a perfect award-winning author of adult and children's books that include Amazing Africa, A to Z, and The Inclusive Leader. Taking intentional action for justice and equity, she serves as a global citizen by supporting education, entrepreneurship, and women's leadership initiatives in Africa. And I'll talk about that. In furtherance of her philanthropic efforts, she created Planting People, Growing Justice Leadership Institute, a nonprofit organization committed to promoting literacy and diversity in books. Wow, what a prolific amount of work. I love that you're even working, on the continent of Africa and just expanding your work. What made you decide to just start your journey? Because that's a lot, you're a doctor. So how did you know that education and learning was a passion of yours, Dr. Tyner?
I think for me, it's just a natural journey. I come from primarily, I always tell people, preachers and teachers. So I feel like I fit in both worlds to be able to share the message that we all can make a difference, make an impact in our communities. And as a teacher and educator, just the joy of learning. Wherever we are, having those opportunities to learn and grow in meaningful ways. So I would say my journey started right in the Rondo community where I come from. We're 5 generations strong in the Rondo community.
Wow.
So Rondo is the home base. You learn the principles from birth, a unity of hope, of justice, and you are born with this righteous indignation to say that we want justice unapologetically. We're not turning back until we see it. And here are the steps and the procedures, processes, and strategies to do it. I just feel like I'm a part of the narration of a dream of my ancestors. I don't feel like I'm doing anything unique. It was just a birthright to lift my voice for justice.
That part. So if you're 5 generations back in Rondo, that means that your family was affected by I-94 coming through, or no?
We were, yes. So that has been, like I said, a part of the narrative that you grow up with, this idea of what injustice looks like and an obligation to correct those wrongs.
And, with having that in your DNA, really, because those families were uprooted from their whole community, and just seeing that you're like living your ancestors' wildest dreams for sure. Like, it's beautiful to see. Can you share with our listeners a bit about your background too, just more about what just motivated you to become an advocate for justice and like education and things like that?
Yes, for me, I was that child. I don't know how my mom raised me. I mean, every day I'm like, give her a trophy because she still is up listening. I was probably wearing her ears out to 2 a.m. last night. Like, what does capitalism mean? Are there other alternatives to build different ecosystems? What can we create? What can we build together? So when I think about that, I would say my personality, can you imagine this in a 4-year-old, 6-year-old? I don't know how my mom did it. So I always tell people, when I was in kindergarten, I was probably first introduced to my full name or government name. Before that, I thought my name was Hush Child.
Oh, wow.
So my mother said, like, hold on. So
you were curious.
Yeah, always raising the big questions. So it left a lot of people surprised, but there were certain people like my mother and certain teachers that had an impact on my life that really nourished that sense of a person who has a broader vision, that's willing to ask the difficult questions, but not just ask the questions, really thinking about how do we engage to create change. So fast forward to today, that's how I became a civil rights attorney. That's how I worked on policy work. That's why I pursued my doctoral studies, wrote my dissertation. I wanted to know my question, big question, but also simple question. What strategies do we need to build and sustain social change? And what steps do we need to take day by day, moment by moment, and build the right type of coalitions and partnerships to build a better world?
And it's such important work too. I feel like, especially in this climate, seeing, affirmative action being struck down by the Supreme Court, seeing a lot of like diversity, inclusion, and things like that being affected. And, you seeing that and just seeing the trajectory. You wearing many hats, from educator to author to CEO. Can you just tell us more about how your role as a CEO of Planting People, Growing Justice Press and Bookstore, and just like what inspired you really to create this initiative?
What inspired me is everything that you're talking about, a quest for racial justice and economic justice, knowing that it's not going to happen on the wheels of inevitability. We have to create the systems and structures around change. So whether we're looking at what is the future policies that promote equity, what are the policies that help to ensure inclusion, it's something that we create in our day-to-day lives. So when I thought about Planting People, Growing Justice, it for me was a life calling, because I'll never forget it. I was in my dissertation class. We were in the writing workshopping with our small group. And my friend Holly said, have you ever heard of the banyan tree? I was like, no, I think we got oak tree in the backyard. No, help me out here. Give me some context. Don't leave me guessing. But she was like, it's one of the only trees in the world that grows new roots from its branches. And that's when I said, a tree has to represent my work, because that was important. And probably about 5 years later, I had the opportunity with the American Bar Association to travel to Hawaii and to see the banyan tree, not easily broken. It's that African proverb, sticks in a bundle cannot be easily broken. So all of a sudden I could really see the vision of it. And then I realized, after being in higher education, working in the private sector, was like, what I've had this vision for, I've never seen before. And that was really not just a challenge, but invitation to say that we can create, and going back to those Rondo roots, we can create the Black ecosystems that nourish and sustain our communities in meaningful ways. And notice I said our communities, because I think it's something for all of humanity, that when we do inclusion right, when we bring people to the table, it's a type of innovation, it's a type of creativity that can change the world.
You were feeding my soul this morning. Kind of knowing that I grew up in Rondo as well, and just thinking about, my family was immigrants into Rondo, but there were so many amazing Black people, I feel like, that were in the Rondo community that really helped shape like my morals, the way that I view education in the world. Who were those people for you from that community that really just poured into you, Dr. Tyner? Who were they?
I would say, of course, from the connection of the work and creating greater access to healthcare and building community clinics. Of course, Dory Bolo, God bless her soul. I mean, she was the one that was worried about everyone's health and well-being.
Mm.
She offered the education, the medical services, didn't matter if you could pay. It was just like, let's make sure you're healthy and whole. Also, a pivotal piece of my work has been inspired by another educator, Reverend Carl Walker. And when I think about Reverend Walker and Walker West, what an invitation. Right now, where we're sitting, I was just up last night evaluating the data. About 10% of Black children are proficient in math. I learned math playing the piano, learning the notes, learning the beats. So learning happens everywhere. So that's why the work of Little Moments Counts is so important, because we have to foster learning being incorporated to all activities of our day-to-day life. So of course, Reverend Walker, Thelma Buckner, Granny, hands down.
Oh, you're taking me back.
Yeah, Granny was the anchor. I mean, oftentimes when people say, why did you start work in Africa? What were you seeking to accomplish? I was like, I watched Granny work to heal the world in some meaningful way. So why would I not continue on the legacy of some of the things that she taught me? She was doing outreach in Haiti, throughout the continent of Africa, and across the African diaspora before I even could spell or understood what all those words mean or could identify those places on the map. She was doing that work with her brother, Reverend Walter Battle. So when I think about Rondo and the modeling of the process, you think of our community historian, and you're thinking about the work of Mr. Mr. Anderson, Marvin Anderson. I almost said Mr. Rondo Anderson. To catch myself.
That could be it that way because he loves Rondo.
Mr. Marvin Anderson, the work of documenting our history and then leveraging my work, saying, okay, now you support. I worked on a project with him recently about the women of Rondo and looking at, I was just picking up where they left off. Because oftentimes in life, we write it as this is our chapter. Here she is. Artika Tyner was here. She's a professor. She did her Planned People Growing Justice, period. That's not how life really works. If we're really focused on faith, humanity, and legacy and our cultural roots, it's not a period. It's really a comma that I was here and then I passed the torch to somebody else and continue to work. So life is really a comma. I learned that from Ambassador Andrew Young when he was describing Dr. King. Because many people say, well, the legacy, the dream died with the messenger. The reality of it is it was just beginning. It was that ripple that went to Ambassador Andrew Young, Reverend Jesse Jackson. It continued to work, Congressman John Lewis. So I want us all to start thinking about, oftentimes we write our story and our script of our lives, and it was just like, it's about us, period. But really it's about a comma, a continuation. And that's what my elders in Rondo taught me.
That collective good that I'm just so curious about how our collective good can help us and move us through these dark times that I feel like are not even though they're dark times. We're just changing, and change, we're afraid of change, but actually change is good.
It's a constant as well. So we have to welcome change and usher in what change can do for us.
Yeah. So then the organization that you have, Planting People, Growing Justice Leadership Institute, is committed to promoting literacy and diversity in books. And just wonder if you can discuss the importance of diverse representation in literature, especially just for children, and how your institute, is contributing just to the cause.
It's essential. When you have 1 in 4 American children who cannot read at grade level by the 3rd or 4th grade, we know that they're 4 times more likely to drop out of school and 3.5 times more likely to be arrested during their lifetime. I shouldn't be able to say that and quote that almost like a rule of 4. For me, it was personal because I'm a civil rights attorney working on criminal justice and education issues. Many of my clients learn how to read while in prison. 85% of juveniles in the correctional facilities and detention centers cannot read, 60 to 80% of adults. And if you don't believe me, there is a great book by HBO Films and movie called How Do You Spell Murder? And it explores some of that data on what we need to know about some of the trends in the criminal justice system. So that was really my impetus for change. So when I think about the literacy piece, I knew we could change that. The Department of Justice says the greatest indicator of future incarceration is reading failure. I think we have an intervention and prevention plan right there. But more importantly, what did reading do for me? My life was basically a 1-mile radius. Rondo's wonderful, but that meant I went from Dale and Snelling kind of as far as I went in reverse and back around. I went to Hamlin and Highland Park. My life didn't extend past Snelling.
You are at St. Paul.
I'm in St. Paul. I did my first real connection to Minneapolis when I was going to law school, because my law school was in Minneapolis. I never forget it. My friends were like, why would you go stay at a hotel in Minneapolis? I was like, I don't know Minneapolis. Before I started law school, I better go check this city out. But I say this to give context of what books did for me. I'm going to make it personal for a moment. My favorite place to go was my Rondo library or the library on Rice Street. Through books, I didn't have to leave Dale and Snelling. I was blessed to be able to travel the world throughout Asia, Europe, and Africa. But through books, I had already seen the world. Through books, I was introduced to language, as I also was in a Chinese immersion program. Through books, I was introduced to career exploration. But most importantly, what books did for me, showed me Black excellence. Before there was a hashtag, a Black boy joy, Black girl magic, I knew it because I read about people like A. Philip Randolph in books that organized one of the largest protests in history with the March on Washington in 1963. I had those type of experience to know who I was, to give affirmation of my leadership since I was young. Why would I not share that gift with others and help them to be able to see that they can change the world?
You're bringing this so much emotion for me because I'm wondering, and I'm just curious about, what do you say to those people that find like internships or just bringing other people up with them to be a burden on their own productivity and their own resources, you know? Because it's a problem. It's a real problem.
It is. People tell me all the time, it's like, how do you have a capacity to mentor and teach and support so many? How would I not? People poured into me. So it's just me giving that gift back. And I also believe we sometimes need to change the paradigm that we're looking through. So in all seriousness, when I look at mentorship and supporting people, I think of two things. First, I think of the fact of kind of King David and King Saul. That was back when it's King Saul and just David, right? And one of the things that I find still to be a mystery, when Saul hears this chant that David killed tens of thousands and Saul killed thousands, Saul should have been cheering. Your mentee's supposed to go further, faster. But he let deceit and envy and jealousy get in his heart. Wrong path. So when I think about mentorship, my expectation, all these accolades and things are interesting, but my mentees are going to get those Nobel Peace Prizes. They're going to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're going to remember and say, Dr. Tyner told me to have a moral consciousness about the issues that I'm working on. Dr. Tyner taught me how to live in truth. Dr. Tyner taught me how to be reflective on what I'm doing, how to be strategic, and how to bring forth systemic change. I win in that way. So I think a part of we have to understand and redefine win. Win is a collective attribute. And the second thing that I would say, anytime I'm mentoring and helping anyone, and when I say that, I'm really helping myself by inspiring others that are amazing. But here's what it is, because oftentimes people look at it through a deficit model. It's an assets-based approach for me, because it means that I have a specific role, that I'm a treasure hunter. Think about all the people who found the treasure in me. Well, first of all, I was even looking at myself and trying to, like my mom, I said, with a lot of patience and grace, but I would say she talks too much. My running name from one of my cousins, she always said, that's fish lips. Her lips are always.
Come on now.
No, she's like, where's fish lips? There she goes again. But she was one of my greatest cheerleaders. Yeah. My cousin Felicia was like, keep going. Because I know when your lips stop, the work is stopped. But she took something that somebody else would have said a deficit. If I was in the school system today, they would say, she's disorderly, she's obstructing legal process, she's all these things. I must admit, the piece that would have been the greatest challenge for me would have been that I would have been referred out of the classroom for all these subjective behaviors. Yeah. When instead, there's one teacher that I have to salute. I salute him wherever I go. Mr. Gray saw it as an opportunity. He took a challenge, which would seem like disruptive behavior from talking too much and being distractful. I mean, a teacher's could have got me with just a little more homework, but he did it better than that. He was the one to help me discover I was a teacher. He said, no, I want you to go and teach others. If you get your homework done early, you go teach everybody else.
I love that though, because he was empowering you.
He did. He changed my life.
Yeah, because then you got to do that. And also looking at children sometimes, the ones who are, who do talk a lot, who can be disruptive, who finish their work early, they're bored. But then he gave you something else to do. Like, okay, putting you something that will build your confidence and all that. So that's beautiful.
That changed my life.
Like, ashe to him. Like, I'm so happy for that.
Yes.
you just authored both adult and children's book. So like we said in your introduction, Amazing Africa and A to Z and the inclusive leader, and just talking about, how do you approach writing for different audiences and what messages do you hope to convey through those books?
Well, by writing for both adults and children, of course, that's unique as an author. You usually are picking very specific genre and audience. But I knew if I wanted to really engage in the level of movement building that I wanted to see, it would require me to use an intergenerational approach, that I would have to engage parents, I would have to engage grandparents, I'd have to engage aunties, uncles, a full community. And why is that? Because if we look at learning and engagement in isolation, it's not going to be something that draws people together in a meaningful way. And I had that experience growing up. Sunday meals were a big part of our routine. And, after church, we all came together. We all could come together over what we were reading. My grandma had that old school Encyclopedia Britannica. When she had anything to do, go to Z. You're like, what? Like,
you are making me. Because I got my parents' Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yes, I was like, she had
still got those.
Yeah, she always had some homework for you. So it was, for me, that kind of lifeline, the way we engaged around reading. So the arts and humanities were a part of our day-to-day life. We always had a piano in the house. My uncle would get there and start playing. It was just a part of cultural experience. So reflect on my experience of who I am today, and how I grew in my identity and culture and purpose. I knew that I had to give that gift back. And it wasn't something that just one generation had to figure out, the children. It had to be the whole entire family and village coming together on a learning journey. So my books had to support that level of engagement.
I love it. Just a word. If you are just tuning in, you're listening to The Narrative here on KRSM Radio. We're speaking with Dr. Artika Tyner. It's our Little Moments Count segment. We're just talking about, raising children, first 1,000 days of life and brain development, and how those little moments while you're raising your children can really add to their life. So keep tuning in. We're just going to take a quick little minute-long station break, but we'll be back. And welcome back to The Narrative here on KRSM Radio, speaking with Dr. Artika Tyner. It's our Little Moments Count segment. We do these once a month, and we've just been talking about her journey. She is an educator. She's a doctor, a lawyer, just so many authors, CEO, business owner. And, I'm really interested and curious, Dr. Tyner, just about your experiences in Africa, because sad to say, it's rare to find other Black people, and I say Black with a capital B, that have done work there. You know what I mean? Usually you don't see that too much. And just wanted to know if you could just share some of your experiences and initiatives there, supporting education and entrepreneurship and just women's leadership on the continent of Africa.
Well, I want to first start with the importance of an invitation. For those of us who have not visited the continent, I believe it's an important first step to understand identity and purpose. I believe Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said it best. I was not born in Africa. Africa was born in me. It gives us a sense of a very important birthright. So as I mentioned earlier, of course, I always had a dream of visiting the continent. I just didn't know when. So it was on my vision board, and it was just a question of when and how. And let's go back to mentorship and support. So my professor, Professor Levy Armstrong, invited me to South Africa with her on a trip to be able to share about the new clinic model that we were creating for the Community Justice Project. And I just remember we're just doing a countdown. That was my first trip to the continent. And just the experience of knowing that you're home, that you're a part of a community, a legacy, a history, a purpose. I can't even express the emotion. And ever since then, it was like, let's go. It's just, I can't give anything else, but let's go. And I found truly my home and heritage in Ghana, in the Akwamu Kingdom. Our king is Odenahall Culture III, and just really watching his leadership. I mean, a part of, oftentimes my bishop used to say that leadership is caught and not taught. And I was like, That's deep. So I used to find myself wherever my bishop was, I wanted to be there just to learn, to observe. And I feel the same way about Odenahome, to see that his leadership is about community uplift, about teaching our youth in meaningful ways. So I would say my current work in Ghana is focusing on education and healthcare. Because despite what the media shows you, no one has an interest in the continent related to charity. Our interest is in building capacity and building legacy. And we do that first through education. That's, of course, unleashing, the imagination in meaningful ways, but through healthcare as well, because you have to be whole and healthy and strong to be able to pursue your education, vocation, and whatever is your destiny. So in focusing on education and healthcare, we've supported medical missions to help get supplies and things that, doctors need. We're supporting with education, the Senchi Ferry Library, and providing the leadership training and development programming. The women's leadership piece is supporting women's civic groups and entrepreneurship endeavors to make sure that people can succeed in building their own resources in their community. So a part of it is, and I encourage people to let go of whatever the stereotypes are, what they believe, they know, and what they've seen. Because if we fully understood a few key facts, we would be running to Africa and running across the diaspora. If we understood that we're over 1 billion strong across the diaspora, if we understood that some of the most beautiful cities ranked in the world are right there in the continent, like Kigali of Rwanda, if we understood the great leaders like Yaa Asantewaa, when the men said that they wouldn't fight the British colonizers, she said the women will go. That was a woman king right back then. So if we understood who we were, I think we'd have a different sense of self-worth and consciousness around what we're doing. So Africa to me is more than just a place to see or a continent to experience. It's a birthright, it's a heritage that I hope that many people born domestically in the United States, that they have an opportunity to return back to and reclaim.
It really makes me want to know your opinion on laws that are changing, especially in Florida, about African American studies and things like that, where they're saying, we are going to teach a certain type of curriculum, or they don't want you to do CRT, which is critical race theory, if you haven't heard of that. But I'm just curious about your opinion and about all of those things and how the rejection of it by certain communities, but other people saying, oh, well, no, we need it.
I would say the greatest challenge that we face, I've been an educator for 2 decades now. Go into any classroom and first ask someone, what is critical race theory? Who is the father of critical race theory? What was his aim? What was he seeking to accomplish? No one can answer. But you ask a follow-up question of, do you have an opinion? Everybody's hand goes up. And trust me, I experimented with this in class plenty of times. So I would say a part of what we first had to grapple with is a knowledge gap, that ignorance, because it's easy now with social media, the news, to have a hashtag or commentary without any context. So I would say my greatest achievement, I know you read a bunch of accolades and everything else, I taught my students how to think. I taught them how to ask the difficult questions. I taught them that Dr. Derek Bell helped to create critical race theory out of his own volition because he wanted to increase the diversity in faculty in higher education. And that work is still not done. And he also asked in a provocative way that, do you have power to deconstruct not only an ideology of white supremacy, but a system fueled by it? Or are you left powerless to only torment the system? Now, does that keep me up at night thinking about that? Of course. But I also think it's an invitation to say, instead of just listening to the words and the sound bites that people give, have an understanding of the theory of critical race theory. Where did it come from? What was it seeking to impact? And then from there, start asking the difficult questions. Why is it someone would not want you to learn this part of history? What does it mean? And a big piece of this means in the time of history where we're exploring the future of justice through reparations and reparative justice, I would say it's not a coincidence that these 2 conversations are happening at the same time.
I had to take a deep breath on that. No, because it is disheartening to see, and sometimes it just seems like a really a straw argument, I guess, as to why you think the governor of like of a state in the United States of America would want to single out like African American studies too. And just thinking about all the Black colleges, historic Black universities and things like that that are in Florida, especially like Florida A&M, just built on that legacy of us having our own and learning about our culture. It's just so important, especially as people, I feel like a part of this diaspora and Black Americans, we've had so much of our culture that has been removed and we've made our own. And yeah, we do have our own, but we've lost so much in that transatlantic slave trade. And just trying to make that connection now, what I see more than ever, it's not lost on me that now they're like, oh, we're not gonna, that's not right. This is gonna make other people feel bad, It's those systems that you were talking about earlier. But if you're just tuning in, this is the narrative here on KRSM. I'm speaking with Dr. Artika Tyner, and you have such an impressive list of awards and recognition, and you got an American Bar Association difference maker, and just like, how do all these accolades fuel your commitment to your work, and how do you believe that they impact they cause for you, or no, how do you believe they impact the causes you advocate for?
With all those awards, you get access to a platform. Use it. So that means I always ask when someone says you'll be awarded with such and such, I'm like, can I speak? And they're like, what do you think? How much time do I have? Because it means you build an audience. I've been blessed to travel around the world to talk to probably millions of people at this point, to raise issue on all the topics that we're talking about around Pan-Africanism and the future of Africa and innovation, to talk about education, criminal justice. So I look at each award as an opportunity to create a bigger platform, meaning that we can go into a space now and say, okay, if Dr. Tyner's been there, we have an understanding and mass incarceration is real and its economic impacts and what it looks like. We have an understanding that if we don't address literacy, that we're creating a pipeline that doesn't lead to a pipeline to success. So for me, each award meant I had a platform to engage people, to hopefully touch not only their hearts, but also their minds. Because my ultimate aim is, and I always told my students this, and they look like, what is she saying? Leave your politics at home. Leave your opinions at home. If you cannot substantiate what you're going to tell me, I am not listening. Now, I know for some students that was a bit of a challenge, but by the time a semester was done, they had a different understanding on how to engage. Now, they may go back to their same perspective that they started with, that they thought they were going to tell me, but they now have a process to say, what are the questions behind what I'm saying? What do I need to consider? What is, and it's not just about making a better attorney, it was about helping people to prepare to be those global citizens, to make a better world by asking the questions that make an impact. So for me, when I think about the awards, I'm on the stage. Usually I'm asking that question of what's in your hands to make a difference in the world. And we're asking the strategies then on how do we do that? How do we shape the world? What steps do we need to take? So everything that I've done is about creating the platforms to engage and ask the critical questions.
Critical thinking skills, so important to have. But like when you're talking about substantiate an argument, can you just go a little bit, how do you substantiate? Like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, of course, to substantiate an argument, I mean, on the academic sense, I mean, where's that footnote? Like, where is it? Like, you're not citing yourself and your opinion and what you heard on Facebook, Wikipedia, or Twitter. What we really want is the data. So you know how in Jerry Maguire, they said, show me the money. My work is not about these microphones and all this. If you look at my day, our 24 hours, a lot of days I'm 18 hours working on research because I want to understand the root cause of the challenges. I want to make sure that we have a stronger, more vibrant economy and build a Black ecosystem. That takes research. I had to know that. I was like, well, how many Black business owners are there? What are the challenges that they face? Everybody says undercapitalization at what rate? What type of capital do we need? Who do I need to talk to make sure we can get the capital we need to build vibrant businesses? And the other thing that I've been looking at recently, for example, is it just about building businesses, or is it about building businesses that help to address a market and sector need. So now I'm looking at what are the top 20 sectors and trying to align Black-owned businesses to go into those sectors. Why? Greater economic impact, greater benefit to community. So that's what I mean. Substantiate is not just an opinion. Everybody has a million of those. But to substantiate means I'm going to ask the difficult questions so I can fully understand the context of the problem that we're facing and help to come up with some practical, and notice what I'm going to say, sustainable solutions to them.
Mm-hmm. That part, because you do see a lot of grant making and funding happening, and we're going to support Black business owners, we're going to create them. But if you're just throwing money at them and not really telling them to go into businesses that can thrive and be sustainable and successful, then you can see where it can fall into those tropes of, well, they just don't know how to do it. They're just not educated to do that. So I really appreciate you just going a little deeper with that for me.
Of course. No, you're preaching a sermon right there. Because the data shows that roughly about 3% of businesses are Black owned. We are roughly how much? 12% of the US population. To me, I walk into any room and people are like, what are you doing? Counting. I was just at a room with 15,000 people. I couldn't count 150 Black educators in that room. Something is wrong. Because a little simple math, 12%, just 10% of 15,000 is 1,500. Why did I know most of the Black people in that room across the nation? Something is wrong. So the same is true for Black-owned businesses. I want to see it. So I see that number get beyond 12%. Oh, no, I cannot be silent, because I also know that Black businesses are the lifeline of a Black community. They are the organizations that will hire people. We didn't need to be told ban the box. We were hiring people with a criminal record because we knew that was the right thing to do, but we also knew we were treasure hunters and we had some treasures. When I'm talking about Black-owned businesses, those are the businesses that stand behind me to do Planting People Growing Justice. We sponsor the events. We help to support. We build our ecosystem from the ground up. So when I think about asking those critical questions, how do we help to lift up a Black ecosystem that can help to address some of the social issues that we're facing?
If you're just tuning in to this wonderful conversation with Dr. Artika Tyner, we're doing our Little Moments Count segment here on The Narrative. We're just going to take a quick little station break and get back to more of our discussion, but keep tuning in one moment. Welcome back to The Narrative here on KRSM Radio. I'm your host, Andrea Pierre. On The Narrative, we like to amplify the voices, stories, cultures, and conversations that are happening in our neighborhoods. We're doing our Little Moments Count segment with Dr. Artika Tyner. You are just, I think I love you.
Mutual.
Oh my goodness.
Mutual.
I don't even know how to say this feeling that I get from just listening to your words, because they are so inspirational. And I don't know, you've been featured in a lot of media outlets. And how do you leverage media and public speaking just to really amplify your message and drive the positive change? And also defeat all the things that we carry as Black women and Black people, honestly, because it's hard. It is hard sometimes.
My mantra for my team, they're like, and then we have to do this, and we have to fundraise, then we have to analyze this and all that. I was like, just put the mic in my hand. That's been, my mantra for my team for the last few years. They're like, what is she talking about? I was like, just mic me up. I don't want to talk about anything else you're talking about right now. Just hand me the mic. And why am I saying that? It goes back full circle. Here it is. Hush Child has a lot to say. It's just the maturity and the wisdom that came with it to be able to say, how do I take words and manifest a vision for the future and help bring others with me along the journey? And let me clarify one thing, because most people are oftentimes surprised. They're like, well, that means you're just bringing the people that agree with you. False. It means that you're just bringing the people who share the same ideology, same faith backgrounds, all those people. No, false, and false. I'm bringing together humanity and helping us to see each other more clearly and helping us to build. So when I think about that, you can find me in corporate settings, you can find me in nonprofit settings, you can find me in political settings, up and down aisles, meaning bipartisan initiatives, because I know we have to create impact. So when I think about media, it's just another vehicle. Oftentimes I tell people that my superpower is related to my ability to speak truth to power. And so when I go and when I think about the manifestation of that level of work, it means then that the media can serve as a vehicle to share those messages, to elevate and raise awareness in meaningful ways. But that's just the first step. The next step is to mobilize. This is not just getting people excited. I see that all the time. I get off the stage, standing ovation, people are excited. That's step one. Then we have to mobilize for change. After I'm going, what will you do? What will you do differently? What does it look like? So when I think about my work, I'm just there as a messenger to help bring forth the vision. But the mobilization piece, that's something we have to collectively do. So going back to that image of planting people growing justice again, it's that idea that maybe I'm the one to plant the seed. Maybe you're the one to water it. Maybe somebody else is pruning it. But for society, the wholeness of us all, we get to reap that harvest of justice and freedom. So that's what I'm after. So if the media can serve as a vehicle, I was trained as a journalist. So I oftentimes I'm writing on these issues, get published in media outlets. All I'm looking for is to get the message out there.
And I think what you're bringing up for me is even if you vote or whatever, it doesn't stop there. You got to keep on being engaged with your congressman or council member and things like that to make sure that they are advocating for your initiatives as their constituents. And I hear that a lot. It doesn't just stop at voting or just saying, yes, I want to do that, or just filling out one survey. The continuous engagement is so important. Also, just in your opinion, what are some key challenges and opportunities currently facing like education, justice, diversity, and how do you see your work addressing these issues? I feel like you may have already addressed that, but also just to add on to it, what other people do you see doing that work too that you would want to lift up in the space?
Of course. Now we need session 2, 3, 4. We need fall semester, J term, spring term, because these issues are deeply entrenched because they're about systemic change. But I'll give you just the brief kind of cliff notes, or I told my students I had to train myself to do TikTok moments because I was holding them for 2, 3 classes. They was like, Doc, I got to go. It's like, sorry, I had a lot to say. But I'll start with the end of your question. Who inspires me in this space? I had the opportunity to spend some time with him just yesterday, Dr. Mahmoud El-Kati. So I call him the community historian because he's helping us to understand the historical context that guides our work today. That if we're looking at creating meaningful change, we have to understand from whence we've come to be able to understand what steps we need to take for the future. There's a great monument that always reminds me of this that I go back and see each time I'm in DC. They say that the past is a prologue. That the past is almost like it's already been written, right? Because that's the essence of past or history. But the challenge is, what will you write next? And how will you get us to the epilogue to allow us to have those steps and dreams for the future? What steps and chapters have to come in between? So definitely, professor, you can't help but to say. On the national level, Bryan Stevenson and the work of the Equal Justice Initiative, seeing that it's the advocacy, the legal advocacy, the systems change. And simultaneously, last time I was in Montgomery, it just really hit me around his work about how he really built an ecosystem. He has the lynching memorial, the museum, the restaurant, all these pieces together. And yes, it's about bringing education to the world, but it's also about, in Montgomery not having a lot of employment opportunities, he created jobs. He created brighter futures for everyday people in his community. So that's what compelled me to think more about building business ventures that can help sustain our community in Rondo. In addition to Bryan Stevenson, I would say one of my greatest mentors, cheerleaders, someone that I'm always watching is John Hope Bryant of Operation Hope. The first time that I went to his global conference, I'm like, this is the best conference I've ever been to. And people are like, what? What about the conferences? You're the keynote speaker. Forget about that. Focus on what I'm saying right now. Operation Hope brings the world for the Global Economic Conference. The world is there. So when the world is there, it means we're getting a range of diverse perspectives on how we can build a better world. So John Hope Bryant's work around Operation Hope is supporting the entrepreneurship pieces that I talked about, is helping to support financial literacy and education for young people, is also helping to build a brighter future. They're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, but the work is having a ripple effect across the world. So I highly recommend reading some of his books and engaging with their work. If I think about the other pieces of your question, what are the issues? Where do we need to be? My work, I would say, evolved over time. Initially, I started my work with direct representation of clients. And then I started to evolving to saying, okay, I helped this client, but I look around in the waiting room at the courthouse, and it's like there are 50 more people who will walk into this courtroom and have to appear by themselves and not understand what's happening in the legal system.
Mhm.
How do we bridge those gaps? How do we increase access to justice? 80% of the civil needs, not criminal, but the civil needs, whether it's housing, day-to-day life, people are unrepresented. That's what we're calling access to justice gap.
Mhm.
I want to change that. And what's been fascinating for me is how, for instance, remember I talked about asking those big questions? How can technology help us with that? How can someone, for instance, be able to raise questions? Is there an app that they can raise some of the legal questions and get a baseline of where they should look for more information? All those pieces. How can we, because I know a lot of people are like AI and technology, what if it's a part of the solution to the access to justice gap by getting information into the hands of people who need it that won't otherwise have representation and helping to understand legal proceedings. So I'm concerned about the access to justice gap. Of course, I'm concerned about criminal justice. I grew up during the peak of the war on drugs, where our moms and dads entered the prison gates and returned back home with F for felon on their chest. It impacted us. But one of the ways that I talk about it now, because remember, I said I was representing clients, even dealing with criminal justice side, it meant taking it a step further. One, the literacy piece, where I talked about ensuring that we're not feeding people into this pipeline, but also coupled with that, we cannot ignore, and you've heard me say it a lot of times today, the economic interests. When I wrote a paper on, and I would say this is one of my greatest pieces, 35 books, everything else. When I wrote a paper on the economics of mass incarceration, my life was changed. I could see with better clarity. First of all, I saw failed federal and state, county, city policies that left our communities vulnerable for the war on drugs. I mean, we didn't have jobs, we didn't have access to upper mobility in ways that we needed. And it didn't come out of nowhere. Let's be clear on research. The Kerner Commission already warned us of some of these challenges of what happens to communities when we do not have enough resources. And better yet, because I know people get skeptical and they go, well, what does it mean? That we seem to respect folks like Aristotle. Aristotle said that, what is it? The sense that the parent to crime and revolution is what? Poverty. So when we think about all these pieces, this is, you're getting a sense of how my mind works. I am concerned about how do we change the circumstances within communities so they can have the resources for their own self-care, to build strong families and safe communities. So if I would say where I'm at right now in my thinking is focusing more on economic justice. Not saying that solves every issue, but it sure gives a solid foundation to address the rest of the issues.
It sure does. Even just thinking about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, you have to have it, but your belly's full. You're not worried about hunger. You have a safe place to stay that's clean and safe. Like all those things help you do that self-actualization to like think about those higher things. How could I create art? I can write books. I can, you know what I mean, dance or do things like that. As long as you're not worrying about those basic needs. And poverty really is something that all of us are really having across race and genders and identities and things like that, that I feel like we really need to pay attention to. It is harder to buy a home. Things have gone up. We are in an economic downturn right now. You know, you can't really pay for school and they don't want to give us student loans. So how are we truly as a people are supposed to get, you know, and get what our parents got, not in their generations? So I love that. Aspiring advocates and educators, you got any advice for them? And even thinking just like about what fields of study to go into and things like that, because, you know, I have a lot of interns here at KRSM. What's if they want to do change and they want to have meaningful impact, you know, what careers and things like that should they be paying attention to and looking into?
That's an excellent question. It was one of the questions that no one asked me growing up. They were just like, do well, because I was a first generation student. So I didn't know. It's like, okay, got all the grades, but then what's next? And I remember, I'll never forget it. It'll set the context of why I think it's important to have these conversations early and often. I was in the IB program. I did PSEO, so International Baccalaureate program, just for context of what it is, all these pre-college programs that earn college credit. So I graduated in college in less than 3 years. But the thing was, I got called in the office at the end of my freshman year at the university. And I thought, what did I do now? I thought it was exactly what you were talking about. My loans didn't go through. It's like financial aid, something went wrong.
Hit the
And
road.
then, yeah, I was like, oh, we're just beginning. It's over. They said, no, you have more credits. So you're coming in as a sophomore, almost a junior.
Wow.
What's your declared major? I didn't even know what that meant. It was like, I don't know. You help me. You know, you turn the question like, what do you think it should be? And they said, well, it seems to be that you have a lot of credits in English. So maybe an English major. I said, okay. And I love teaching. So I'll go into teacher ed. Can I do that as a minor? So we set the plan and it worked. Trust me, I wouldn't be sitting here today. But there are two challenges with that story. One, I didn't know anything about where the growth or job sector, what things were happening. Would it have influenced my decision? Possibly so. So I want to start seeing people armed with information and knowledge so they can make a conscious choice on which career makes sense. Because as an English major, once I went to career fair, I was like, what do you do with this? Because I was just speaking of what I knew and what I love, literature. Everyone's like, then you go to grad school and then you do this. And then I ended up in teacher ed and I was like, no, I'm going to law school. And no one knew how to handle that. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, no, the law is a language of power. I'm going to become well-versed in that language so I can change the trajectory of what's happening in my community. So it worked out for me. But imagine if earlier on, I had people that helped to prepare me to think about law school, what steps I needed to take. I was on my own trying to figure out LSAT and which classes to take. So I want to say in that way, the first step is more career introductions. You know, that idea of here are the possibilities of careers. But also, my second point, I'd be remiss if I don't say this, let's take a data-driven approach. We cannot deny that STEM careers are growing faster than all careers combined by 3 times. That means if I was going to school right now, I would be leaning into some of the STEM classes just to make sure that I have an understanding. And I'm just going to tell you this because I believe in being fully transparent. I would say until 4 years ago, and with the peak of the novel pandemic, I only used my computer like a typewriter. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I just type a little bit and here we go.
It's a word process.
Yeah, I just didn't have any other sense beyond that. And most of my research at that point wasn't digital. So I'm physically going to libraries, I still had index cards, Dewey Decimal. My students, they helped me see a lot of things about myself. At one point they saw my phone and they were starting to do a collection plate. So I'm putting money in. I'm like, what is this? They said it's for you. You don't need flip phone. I was like, oh, okay. All right. Got it. You need Apple. I was like, okay, keep your money. I got it. I'll go get an Apple.
So funny.
I say all this to say my students helped to elevate my understanding about how tech could support my life in meaningful ways and take my work to scale. Fast forward to today, social media is what for me? It's not clicking like, it's not laughing at a TikTok video. It's a virtual classroom. Tens of thousands of people are following me every day to understand what I'm doing and how I share information and knowledge. So I say this once again, if STEM careers are going that rapidly, I have team members that help me then to do what? Set my content around and they do all the tech pieces and bring the pieces together in meaningful ways. Last kind of funny story on this. I wasn't aware. I was in an investment club and they kept saying invest in Zoom. They said DocuSign too. I didn't know what they were. Fast forward to today, that would have made a big difference.
Especially during the pandemic.
It was pre-pandemic. And
you'd be like retired.
Yes,
Dr. Artika Tyner.
There you go. I was going to say it. It would have made a big difference for my financial future. So what else am I saying? I want our young people, you can look at the data, you can get discouraged, or you can take the data, take those analytical skills, create investment clubs, create these new ecosystems where we share information and knowledge, turn capitalism on its head, because we'd be using those same tools of capitalism, but all of a sudden making them work for us in meaningful ways.
And there you have it. We have to make it work for us in meaningful ways. My last question, because we only have a few little minutes left, are just, what are your future goals and aspirations? Like what's next for you, Dr. Tyner? Do you know?
It is hard to say. I get that question more often than not, but I will tell you a quote that inspires this piece of my life. It's from the first female head of state in the continent of Africa, the president of Liberia, President Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. And one of the things that President Sirleaf understood was this thing about dreams, that if your dreams were not big enough to scare you, they weren't big enough. I don't think I can even name what's next on my journey, because what God has in store for me, I don't think I could give it a word or a description. Because if I did, even where I sit here today, I wouldn't believe I'm sitting here with you and having this conversation. I wouldn't have believed that I'd write 35 books. I wouldn't believe that I've lived across the world in Europe, Asia, and China. I wouldn't believe any of the things that I've experienced. So I don't think I can narrow it, but I can sure tell you some certainties that whatever I do, it will be about the uplift of my community, the Black community. Whatever I do, it will document our history with accuracy. And whatever I do, it has to build the ecosystems where we can sustain ourselves in meaningful ways.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyner, for being here. What a wonderful conversation. I want to thank everyone for listening to the narrative. You can hear a recording of the show at littlemomentscount.org/podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Little Moments Count, you can visit their website at littlemomentscount.org. And did you want to give out your social media websites or anything like that, Dr. Tyner, as well?
Of course. You can follow me on social media. Look up my name. It's Artika Tyner. So ARTIKATYNER. You can look up our organization and support us. Our bookstore is PPGJ Books. So that's for Planting People, Growing Justice Books. And you can also follow our nonprofit. I want to give one last invitation. We also, through our nonprofit, host writing competitions. Here's an invitation to the community. Join us. Tell your story. Got voice, got power. That's the words of the community organizers. So we want you to join in. For Planting People, Growing Justice, go to our website and look at Share Your Story. We have a competition of sharing your Rondo story. We have one on food justice. We have a range of different topics, and we need to hear your voice.
We'll see you all next week. This episode will replay on KFAI 930 FM on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And we'll see you back again next week. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Little Moments Count radio podcast in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. You can find the Little Moments Count radio podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.